Happy Monday, everyone. Tara Talmadge alongside Mike Irwin, our senior analyst. And it's Monday, so of course that means it is time for Ask Mike. And as always, Mike, you're going to start us off with a COVID-19 update. What do you got for us?
Yeah, this is the most important COVID update because it actually comes after we've actually started playing games in the SEC, something, once again, a lot of people said would never happen. The good news is all 7 games were played. We didn't know that a week ago at this time. We weren't sure, because they still had some tests to administer to the various teams. So they all made it. We don't know anything about the other teams, but we do know that just based on what we saw from guys in the game, it looks like Arkansas might have had 4 or 5, maybe 6 guys out. Didn't look like any of the starters were out. And we don't know how many of those tested positive and how many of those were quarantined with contact tracing. But those numbers are good, acceptable, not going to affect you in a game, and if it's good like that across the SEC, then that's a good thing to talk about.
All right, let's get to our...
I'm not through.
No, still more.
Still got more to go. I want to point out once again that this didn't just happen by accident, getting to play these games. Look at all the difficulties, not just here in Arkansas, but across the country. I follow a lot of high school football, and teams are having trouble. They're having to cancel a lot of games, and it's because they don't have the same benefits that the SEC came up with, and this was a result of work all summer where they came up with a lot of ways to prevent these outbreaks. And I'm not going to get into everything they did, but again, it didn't happen by accident, and this is why I continued to believe that we were playing games, because I knew the seriousness that which the conference took this, the work that was being put into it by the conference office, their safety public health committee, the schools had one. The ADs, the players, the coaches, everybody worked to make it happen. Now, there's still an issue here, and that is we played games with fans in the stands, and that there's a COVID possibility of a problem there too. Because based on, and I didn't get to see a lot of the games because I was working covering the Arkansas game, but based on what a lot of fans have told me from watching these various games, it doesn't look like that all of those games were managed the same way in terms of COVID. We've had people say, hey, I saw some guys with no masks on at this game or that game. It looks like some of the schools did a better job of socially distancing people than others.
Yeah.
The proof in the pudding in this is going to be this coming week, whether or not you get reports of fans getting COVID clearly from being at games. And if there's a lot of that, then there's a danger that you won't have fans at games, and these schools need this. You need to understand, everybody keeps saying, well, you're just worried about the money. Yes, money, I am worried about the money because the money drives this stuff. And these schools are already taking a major hit by not having very many fans in the games, and you don't want them to wipe out the rest of the fans at the game and just have nobody like you have in the NFL. So hopefully we won't have a COVID outbreak at some of these schools as a result of these games, but we're going to have to wait and see about that.
Yeah, it's interesting though, Mike. I think going into this season, SEC teams were supposed to do a test on Friday. They didn't do that this week. I don't know if that's an official change or anything. They still did 3 tests, but they didn't have to do it Friday. I don't know if that's because they don't want to wait that long or what, but
I'm not sure about that either, because that was supposed to be the main thing that they did, because that way they would know that whoever's in the game didn't
They tested on Thursday, though, this week. So
very strange.
We'll see what happens. Now let's get to the questions. Our first question this week is from Roadhog82, who wants to know which player or position groups exceeded your expectations and which ones have the most improvements to make.
Well, obviously, a lot of people are going to say the offense needs to improve. I just don't think you can evaluate these guys properly.
Yeah.
Now, look, Andy Hodges, who's a member of the media, know him very well. He wrote a blistering account on the internet of our Arkansas's offense, saying there's no excuse for this. You can't make excuses for it. They should have been better prepared, criticized the play calling, a lot of different things. I'm just not going to go there for the same reasons I've stated all along, and I'm not saying this after the fact. I said it last week, the week before. When you looked at Georgia on paper, we knew this was going to be a tough test for that offense. It's not the kind of team you want to face right off the bat when you're trying something new with a new offensive coordinator, new quarterbacks, and all that stuff. They typically, whatever team it was doing what Arkansas is doing, you typically would have a couple of non-conference games to kind of work out the kinks. Again, I'll use the analogies. You wouldn't want to walk into class one day, the first day of school, and get a final exam, and yet that's what they got. The toughest team they will face defensively, I believe Georgia's a little better than Alabama defensively, and you had to play them right off the bat. So that gave a skewed look at the offense. I may have to eat my words if this offense continues to struggle, but I don't think it will. And so I just can't really evaluate the offense properly based on who they went up against. Now, special teams, no excuse for that.
Yeah, agree.
And we expected a lot better from that. I'm not sure what exactly happened because the kicking part of it was good. It was the coverage that was bad. Typically what happens in a situation like that is you've got some issues with speed on your special teams unit or whatever. All we know is that Sam Pittman said he was going to get personally involved in that this week. That's always like you're a coordinator and this guy's going to get personally involved in your business. So we'll see how that works out. Grant Morgan said, look, Scott Fountain he's amazing. We have all kinds of faith in him. We don't blame this on him. It was our fault, and we're going to get it corrected. Now, look, the defense looked really good. It's
surprisingly good.
It's hard to criticize those guys. So when I evaluate this, not really sure how to evaluate the offense. I think it'll take another game or two to evaluate them properly. Defense looked good. Special teams, no.
You also got to think about the little amount of time that they had, really, to work with this new staff and stuff.
That's right.
So that plays a factor as
well. And throw in the COVID thing, yeah.
Exactly.
Everybody dealt with it, but not everybody had a new staff.
Right. Our next question comes from Delta Boy, who wants to know, what do you think about the defense?
Well, it looks good. Now, I want to throw a caution in here because if you strictly looked at what they did after Georgia made a quarterback change and they brought this kid Bennett in, it was totally different. They didn't look so good then. So it could be that part of why they look so good is Georgia had the wrong guy in at quarterback. But I still think they did a good job of stopping the running game. They did a lot of other things I didn't expect. I thought there was going to be a problem at linebacker, and honestly, I thought there might be a problem in the secondary because that's where we've had problems in the past with a lack of speed or whatever. And I thought the pass coverage was really good. I thought they were in position. I thought the linebackers came up and made tackles and did at least a decent job in coverage. So in the defensive line, they didn't get a lot of sacks, but they did have some thrown for losses and put some pressure on the quarterback, made him throw before he wanted to. So overall, I thought the defense performed very well.
Definitely an improvement over the past couple of years. Let's get to our next question, though. River Valley Hog 55 says, I think it is apparent that the offense was non-functional overall as a unit. However, do you have an opinion to why we didn't see Trey Knox targeted very much?
You know, first of all, I think Traylon Burks and Mike Woods did such a good job of getting open. I mean, if you're a quarterback, if you're Felipe Franks, you know you got to get the ball off in a hurry. You're going to throw the ball to who's open.
Right.
And they were just open more. Now, Knox's problem probably was a little bit the press coverage that he went through. But he's more your deep ball guy anyway. And you're not going to get a chance to throw a deep ball against these guys very often because it takes time for that to develop, and he was having to get rid of the ball quickly. I think you're going to see Trey Knox do fine this year. There'll be other defenses that aren't built the way this one is, and he may be your guy that goes deep on people.
Let's get to our next question from number one Stunna, who says, the trick plays were atrocious and not needed. What do you think?
I'm not a big fan of trick plays myself, but Sam Pittman said this about that. He said, look, we're going to continue to call trick plays. The issue is not whether or not when you called it. He said whether it works or not.
Right.
And I believe in that. Here's what you always get. It's a lot like three-point shooting in basketball, where a guy that's not supposed to be a good three-point shooter puts one up and you go, don't shoot that, and then it goes in. You know, if you call a trick play and it works, you look like a genius.
Right. It's always great.
If you call one and it doesn't work, then everybody starts criticizing the offensive coordinator. Why did you call that trick play? And you shouldn't have called it then, there, whatever. Here's the thing about trick plays. You can tell as a player involved in that trick play, as the guy that's going to get the ball, you know very quickly if you fooled anybody or not. It's apparent. So let's look at those two plays. The T.J. Hammond's reverse. He takes the ball, immediately what he sees are 3 or 4 Georgia defenders already in the backfield.
Right.
What he should have done at that point is make a right turn and go straight toward the line of scrimmage and just try to get what you can get.
Yeah.
Instead, he tried to circle around behind him, which was completely nuts.
Yeah.
And then he goes back into the end zone and fumbles the ball, and it turns into a safety. So, you know, that was the mistake made by the guy on the special teams that got the ball. Now, Traylon Burks, okay, for a receiver, he throws the ball pretty well. I guess he played some quarterback in high school, Wildcat or whatever, so he's a lot like D-Mac. He can throw the ball when he has to. But he's still not a passing quarterback.
No.
So when you get the ball on what we used to call a halfback pass, quarterback throws the ball to you, then you throw it downfield. The first thing you need to look at is anybody wide open? If they're not, don't throw it. Because you're not good enough to throw the ball into coverage, and he threw it into double coverage, which caused the interception. It wasn't a lot of damage from that per se, because it ended up being like a punt. But again, if there's a lesson to be learned in this, if you're going to do special teams, learn to recognize if the play didn't fool anybody. And if it didn't fool anybody, don't try to turn it into something that it's not, because you're going to get a disaster out of it.
I'm curious to see what other trick plays, though, he can pull out in the next couple weeks.
Exactly.
Let's get to our next question from Chi-Town Hog, who says, I thought we showed a lot of promise, but some of our fans thought we were going to beat the number 4 team in the country. Jeez.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I'm not going to criticize fans for getting on the internet last week and saying we're going to win, blah, blah. I like that attitude.
Yeah.
You want fans to be positive.
It's better than the alternative.
Yeah, the only problem there is if you really believe that to the point where you get mad because they don't beat the number 4 team in the country. And I didn't see a lot of that. I didn't see a lot of criticism on Facebook or Twitter from fans saying, oh, they really stunk it up. I expected more. I think Arkansas fans are pretty savvy about this. They know it's going to take a little time to turn this thing around. And I just think it was a case of them being positive, and then when it doesn't work out that way, you don't jump off a cliff because of it.
All right, Blood Red Hog asks, what happened with special teams? That was an utter disaster for Coach Fountain. We kind of touched on that.
Well, it wasn't a complete disaster because the kicking part of it was actually very good.
Yeah.
George Caratan averaged 47 yards on 6 punts. That was 1 yard less than Georgia's kicker, who was fabulous. So that part of it was good. Vito Calvaruso, or whatever you want to say.
You got it.
He kicked off very well. He kicked, all of his kicks went into the end zone. Now, one of them was returned back to midfield, and then on that free kick back to Georgia after the safety, they kicked that off instead of punting it. And he kicked that one off 70 yards, and it got run back to about midfield. So the problem wasn't the kicking. It was good. The problem was the kick coverage, which was horrible. Georgia had, I think, 148 yards in kick returns between kickoffs and punts. That's awful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just awful. And they've got to stop that. And then they had the one blocked punt, which it looked like the block came straight up the middle. So that's a mistake made in the, the blocking on the punt. Typically what happens with special teams when you have a lot of return yardage is you've got a team that doesn't have a lot of depth, and the guys you've stuck on the special teams don't have as much talent as maybe your starters on offense and defense, and they don't have the speed. And then you end up with problems. So what happens a lot of times is coaches will go back and say, look, I'm taking a real risk here, but I got to get some more speed in on that coverage. So we're going to take a Traylon Burks. We're going to take a Trey Knox.
Yeah.
We're going to take a Catalan, and
Sometimes
we're going to put them in on our special teams.
Yeah.
And risk them possibly getting hurt because we've just got to do a better job. I don't know if that's going to be how they respond. It could be that they went back and looked and there were some fundamentals mistakes made rather than a lack of speed, but that's the way it works with special teams. If you get those big return yards, it's usually because you don't have enough speed on your units.
Let's get to our next question. It is Roadhog82 who wants to know, do you think our problems on offense were more due to Georgia's defense, or do you expect to see more of the same problems going forward?
No, I think it had a lot to do with Georgia's defense, and I don't expect a lot of the same problems moving forward. I expect the running game to be there with Rakeem Boyd. I think that the offensive line is about 20 pounds a man bigger, and by all accounts, they're stronger in the weight room, so I can't imagine they would go backwards. And I can't imagine Rakeem Boyd going backwards. I just think this was a case where Georgia really is so strong up front that they stopped the running game and they just said to themselves, we'll take a chance on the passing game. And they gave up some yards through the air. A lot of people don't realize this, but Franks had 200 yards passing. That wasn't terrible.
No.
It's not like he had 85 or something like that. So he just threw the 2 picks. The other pick came from Traylon Burks. So it wasn't terrible. the running game just didn't work. But they averaged 3 yards a carry, which is not horrible. 4 would have been better.
Of course.
But I just think they'll get better in the running game, and I do think it had a lot to do with the defense they faced, and I think that's going to become apparent as the season moves on.
Yeah. All right. Our next question is from Wild Bornado, who says, Auburn player number 23 ran an interception back for a touchdown, then proceeded to celebrate, hugging and yelling face-to-face with unmasked fans in the end zone. Is there anything we can do about this before our Razorbacks visit them on October 3rd? Just wanting to help keep our players healthy.
You know, I didn't see that, so I'm just going to assume he gave an accurate description. But that sounds like a problem for Auburn's players,
exactly,
not any opposing players like Arkansas. You're not going to have, I promise you, any Arkansas player hugging and hanging out with Auburn fans. That's not going to happen. So if anybody needs to be concerned about that situation, it's Gus Malzahn. If I were him and that really happened, I would chew that player out. I would talk to and if there were fans not wearing masks at the game, then I go to the stadium people and say, what was going on there?
Yeah.
Because let's face it, these players are tested before the game. They don't have COVID, but you don't have that with the fans.
Right.
So you don't want those fans anywhere near the players. And if that happened, then it's a problem with the stadium. It needs to be managed better. But it's not a problem for visiting teams. It's the way it's described will be a problem for the home team.
All right, our next question is from Austin Hogfan, who says, this week against the air raid offense, I hope we never need to punt or it'll be a long night. Seems like our run game getting over 250 yards is our only real chance to stay close and under 50 points. Do you agree?
I do agree, and I'll give an example. Arkansas played Texas Tech, I think it was 2016. Patrick Mahomes was their quarterback. It was a game here in Fayetteville. And that game really boiled down to it was a back and forth game, but in the second half, Arkansas had to punt a couple of times. And that was the difference in the game because Texas Tech didn't punt. They scored when they got the ball, and Arkansas had to punt a couple of times, and that's all it takes. And typically that's how air raid teams win. They just keep moving the ball, and sooner or later you don't, and then all of a sudden you lost the game by a couple of touchdowns. Let's look at the opposite approach on that. That would be the year before that with the game played in Lubbock, in which Brett Bielema used Alex Collins and the ground game to totally keep the ball away from Tech's air raid offense. In the second half, this is still one of the most unbelievable things I've ever seen. In the second half, entire second half, Texas Tech had 3 possessions. They had 1 possession in the fourth quarter. They had the ball 1 time. How does that happen? Because you just do ball control. You're going down the field 3 yards, 4 yards, 3 yards, 5 yards, and you're just making first downs, and you're milking the clock, and you're not throwing the ball. So that is a way to beat an air raid team. You know, Mike Leach cannot hurt you if he's standing over there picking his nose with his offensive guys on the bench.
Yep.
And the way you do that is to run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. Will that be Arkansas' strategy? Well, here's the problem. Talking about that is one thing. Doing it is something else. This is the interesting stat from that Mississippi State LSU game.
Yeah.
LSU wasn't stupid. They did try to run the ball. They ran it 38 times, much more than they threw it. Guess how many yards rushing they had from 38 attempts? 80. That's right at 2 yards a carry. That doesn't get you a first down.
Yeah.
So that's the scary thing about this Mississippi State team. It looks like they might have a pretty good run-stop defense, which would solve the one defensive problem, because Mike Leach's teams typically outscore people, but his defenses are usually terrible. Well, they weren't terrible in this game. So some of this, though, I would caution everybody, we're so early in the year. This could be a big problem with LSU that nobody anticipated. Right. They lost a lot of players off that team, including the straw that stirred the drink, you know, and their wonderful quarterback. And they lost coaches. Probably we should have seen this coming a little bit.
Yeah. Now,
how bad is it? It could be really bad. We don't know. So, you know, they're down there celebrating in Starkville and acting like they've won the national championship right now. And it may be that they just beat a team that's not very good this year. We don't know. So.
Still early. Pork Soda asks, Mike, what player on offense and defense stood out to you as making the biggest impact on the game?
Obviously, on the offensive side is Traylon Burks. He had, I think, 7 catches for 101 yards or something like that.
Yeah.
and a touchdown, so he did that. Boy, defense, it's hard, but I'd probably go with Jalen Catalon. He had 9 total tackles, and he had that forced fumble, but there were a lot of guys you could really turn to on the defensive side. I just think maybe he stood out a little more.
I like those picks, though. Those are good ones. NWA Hog says, my evaluation of this season will come down to one question. Do I see a better team at the end of the season than I did at the beginning? I haven't been able to say that the last 4 years. What do you think?
Yeah, I like that. I do. That's the sort of the approach I'm taking.
Right.
Now, I don't know that all fans will, but, again, let's go back to that article that Andy Hodges wrote, where you just say, hey, there's no excuses. I'm sorry, Andy, there are excuses.
There are,
if you don't think that taking a new offensive coordinator with a new offense, with a new quarterback, and still an offensive line that's trying to get better, and a team that won 2 games last year, and you don't think that putting them up against the number 4 team in the country with maybe the best defense in the country in the very first game isn't going to cause issues, it just is. We can sit here all day long and say there's no excuses. Let's stick you out there and let you go against those guys. There are excuses.
Exactly.
There's excuses for the coaches, for the players. You don't want to belabor that, but it just is a reality. And the minute I realized they were going to play an all-SEC schedule, and then when I looked and saw that they were going to play Georgia in the first game, and I mean, Missouri had the same issue. They did the same thing to them. They stuck them with Alabama. And the minute I saw that, I went, come on.
Right.
You're not going to start the season off looking great in a game like that. You're just not. So it is what it is. Again, I'm not in favor of making excuses, but if you don't think that's an excuse, you don't know anything about football.
And it's an improvement, though. That team looked improved.
Right.
So
that's the real issue on this question is whether or not you can look at this team right now and then look at the end of the year and see definite improvement, because he's right. For the last 4 years, this team has been worse at the end of the year than it was at the start of the year. And that's what you really need to measure this bunch again. And I think there's going to be improvement. I don't think there's any way they'll go backwards.
That's true. Let's hope so. Sam Buckhart says, really enjoyed the first half. Do you look for running game to do well against Bulldogs? Cowbells cause COVID.
Well, again, we addressed that a little bit. I do think they'll do better, but I hope they don't run into the same problems LSU ran into.
Yeah.
Because Arkansas, as bad as that running game was against Georgia, that's 3 yards a carry. Georgia had 2 yards a carry against Mississippi State. Again, I think maybe we're overrating LSU a little bit. Maybe they don't have a good running game this year, and this will become apparent. So, again, I think you're going to see this running game step up a little bit better this week, and they're going to need it because, again, that's the way to beat these guys. You got to establish a ground game. You can't try to, out-throw the ball against Mike Leach. It just won't happen.
Well, #HammerDown says, our D line looked better against Georgia than it has in years. Which player stood out to you the most? Also, our O-line did a better job of pass blocking than they did at run blocking. What has to change in the coming weeks for us to get better push in the run game, other than not playing Georgia again?
Which player stood out the most?
On your D-line.
On the D-line, I'd have to go with Dorian Gerald.
Yeah.
I mean, he had 4 tackles. He had a thrown for loss, and he had a sack. So I would say he stood out the most. But really, honestly, the 2 guys that stood out the most on the defensive side were those 2 linebackers. We thought there might be problems with, Grant Morgan and Bumper Poole. They had a combined 24 tackles in that game. That's unbelievable. They both stepped up. So I'd still say if you're talking D-line, it's Dorian Gerald.
And Dorian Gerald actually is kind of hurt right now. We heard from Sam
That's
Pittman
true.
earlier.
You hope that he comes back because he really had a good effort in that game, and that was one of the bright spots for sure.
Pittman said it's a wait-and-see kind of situation, so that's exactly what we'll do. We will wait and see. But our next question comes from Twinkie275, who says, with other potential and actual game upsets Saturday, what could the SEC look like at the end of the season in terms of producing a playoff team? Could this totally flip what the powers that flip what the powers that be wanted? Could we see Tennessee and Mississippi State in Atlanta?
Okay, let's go back to the alleged 4 teams that they protected through scheduling, because let's just examine this, and it's a thing we've talked about before. If you're the SEC, when you concocted that decision, okay, the best way to play the season is conference games only, because we want to back everything up. We don't want to be trying to play games early in the year when we still have these COVID issues and students are coming on campus. So you make the decision to play a conference-only schedule. What's the first thing that enters your mind? Uh-oh, no matter who we're talking about, whether it's Alabama, Georgia, or whatever, it's going to be a lot harder on them, because now they're going to have to play 10 SEC games, not 7, you know? So what do you do there? You know, you're going to have to protect some teams that you think might be in that playoff picture, because you want to get at least one in. So who did they protect? They obviously protected Georgia and Alabama, because look where they got sent. They said, okay, we're going to take a road game for you and make it an easy road game. So they got, you know, Georgia got Arkansas and Alabama got Missouri. And that all worked out. It was a little closer than you thought for Missouri for a while. But look, that Alabama game, they jumped off to a big lead and then just coasted. I watched part of that. That wasn't closer than you thought. That was Nick Saban just going, okay, we got the game won, who cares? Florida gave up a lot of points to Ole Miss, but they still won the game rather handily. So those 3 teams were in good shape. The only team that got upset is LSU. Let's go back to what we've said. They may not be as good as we think. Here's what I think. I think the SEC championship game, big surprise, is going to be Georgia and Alabama. And one of those 2 teams is going to go to the playoffs. Tennessee and Mississippi State in the SEC championship game, don't get carried away here. It's not going to happen.
All right, that is all the questions we have, but we have our shout out.
Yeah, you ran into some U of A students, the Dwell House boys. Wanted to say thanks for watching the show. We appreciate that. And they wanted to know how they could get a question on. And we don't do this often enough. This is Hogville based. Pig Trail Nation has a sort of a tie-in with Hogville. We help them, they help us out. And this is a way of helping them out, because the only way you can get a question on the air on this show is to be a member at Hogville. So what do? You go to hogville.net on your computer. Then there are instructions there on how to join up. You get a username, you submit it. It takes them about a day or 2. They want to make sure that somebody else doesn't have that username. There's 30,000 people signed up there. It's pretty hard to find a new username, so you might have to be creative. But you get a username, and once you've got that, then you just log on and you go to the Ask Mike forum, and there's a thread in there every week on where to put your question, and it's pretty simple once you do that. So if you want to, we always appreciate having U of A students watch the show. So spread the word. That's the way. Join Hogville and post your questions.
They were so excited. All right, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Ask Mike, guys. Thanks for watching.